Hello, I'm Deborah Malone, founder of The Internationalist and host of Internationalist Marketing TV. And today's guest is Bob Liodice, CEO of ANA, the Association of National Advertisers. Bob, welcome to the show. It is always a pleasure to talk to you any time of year about any subject.
Deb, it's mutual. We love always connecting with the Internationalist, and you're just a great host. So a real pleasure to be here.
Well, wonderful. Well, listen, you had a major annual event not that long ago. So why don't we start a little bit with Masters of
Sure.
Marketing? It's always one of those events, at least in my mind, that anticipates trends in marketing, but it also provides a bit of a snapshot of what matters most in the current year. So, what would you say your key takeaways were from this year's Masters?
Yeah, thank you, Deb. And the Masters was a very, very interesting gathering. First of all, it really was one of the first and most important conferences that brought people back together again. And we had been seeing throughout the year, whether it was in Cannes or the IAB Leadership Conference or the WFA Global Marketer Week, that people are finally starting to come back and do in-person events. And at the Masters, we were fortunate enough to have about 2,100 people there that just truly enjoyed being together. But as you correctly point out, the speakers that we had a very, very interesting perspective that was somewhat different than what we had at past Masters, where we essentially had consistent themes in the past. In this Masters, it was a little bit different. We began in our pre-conference session having a very robust conversation on the metaverse, what it is, what it's about, how it can be leveraged. And we gained a wide global perspective of what the potential of the metaverse can be, even though we kind of all recognize that we still don't truly understand how best to leverage it. But as we got into the main stage type of speakers, what was fascinating was the wide range of areas of focus that really harken back to how do I manage my business most successfully. And in that regard, it kind of lived up to the theme of the event, which was being a force for growth and a force for good. We had Mark Pritchard, who opened up with a great focus in on multicultural marketing and indicating that essentially the future growth of our GDP was contingent upon the very diverse elements that we have within our culture today. And as marketers, it's our responsibility to ensure that our multicultural marketing and our representation within our industry is in fact quite robust. You had Chris Brandt, who is from Chipotle, who spoke so much about the need to have highest quality within your product and service, that if you're going to demand and generate great brand loyalty, that you really have to have the reason for being, for ensuring that people have rationale to come back to that particular brand, and indicated that all of their investments are targeted at ensuring consumer delight. And then you had Susie Deering at Ford that basically talked to the incredible transformation of the auto industry and the move towards electric vehicles and the manufacturing requirements that are necessary, the ability to differentiate car vehicles from each other, et cetera. So what we had was an extraordinarily diverse focus on what we consider to be the fundamental elements of growth, which include brand creativity and media, data technology and measurement, talent and marketing organization, and what has grown in great popularity and focus these days, society and sustainability, with a true focus in on DEIB and sustainability. So lots of great conversation, wide-ranging interaction, and candidly, one of our better conferences that I think our audience enjoyed.
So that it's very interesting that you say that, because it almost seems like there's a balance going on between going back to some pure marketing basics
Yeah.
about brand differentiation, and building on strength, and then trying to navigate so much of what's new, as you say, whether it's the metaverse or changing demographics or just managing planet better. So I mean that it, in some ways it doesn't surprise me because I think there's so much on marketers' plates now that it's interesting to see that range rather than being on a single theme, which you probably have a lot on single themes right now with all of your committees. But let's bring that a little bit into a focus of both 22 and 23.
Right.
Before we look to the new year, and year end is always when you start to look to the new year, how would you characterize 2022 for the industry? I mean, was it about moving beyond a lot of ongoing crises, whether it's pandemic, war, economic, or did you see some other pioneering issues for marketers?
Well, I think you set it up very, very well. I mean, not only in the industry, but our entire environment has gone through so much over the last couple of years, whether it be COVID, the economic disruptions that happened first with supply chain issues and now with robust inflation and an impending recession, the disruptions that happened because of the Ukrainian war, and so on and so forth. This is the 20s have not been a kind decade so far to us all. And what that has required the marketing ecosystem to do is to evolve and transform and experiment. And, the footing that we had so confidently prior to the advent of COVID um, took a back seat to those things that we could truly grab hold of. In one respect, that was very good, and you kind of alluded to it in back to basics in brand building, I think was an increasing respect for the consumer and the need to be able to make those connections authentically. Yes, everybody understands marketing is about building brands and selling product in the end, but you just can't do it these days because the consumers will call you out if you are being inauthentic. And the areas that are most important to them are things such as DEIB and sustainability and the ability to ensure that as you're pursuing growth, you're doing it with humanity in mind. And what has come out very, very strongly is this concept of brands for humanity, where all of these things are now converging that says, yes, we understand you have to sell product, but be sure that we are taking into account the health and well-being of our planet, the health and well-being of all of our individuals, and ensure that the quality of life that we have is enhanced beyond recognition. And so we're learning those lessons. And yes, you may want to call it purpose or whatever, but I do think that the need to truly reflect what America is thinking, and we've been through a lot. I mean, just think of the racial and social strife that we've been through in the last couple of years. That has to be authentically demonstrated that companies are interested in diversity and inclusion and fairness to all. So that doesn't mean that we've taken a backseat to innovation and creativity. And I think that's where the whole focusing on the metaverse has come forward with the greed and focusing on technology and the implications that we all have towards privacy, which is another area of consumer focus that unfortunately is very wearisome because we still have not come up with national privacy legislation that we all can agree to follow and ensure that we are kind of falling to one set of rules in the way we can market, especially through digital marketing, to our respective consumer audiences. So there is a lot on the plate of marketers today, and balancing all of those with respect to the priorities of pleasing shareholders and CEOs and CFOs is a humongous task that CMOs are greatly challenged by. And that's the reason why the ANA in particular has such a wide agenda, because we recognize that those priorities scale across not only just the top 50, but when you think about the long tail of small and medium-sized businesses, we have to ensure that they're healthy and they understand what those key insights are, and to ensure that their marketing is staying current with the trends that are taking place.
No, you mentioned a lot of things in that answer, and certainly a wide range, and it just prompts so many different questions for me. And I
Sure.
think maybe the easiest thing to do is to go through just to go through some of them. Some of the areas that I'd love to talk a little bit more about is growth, particularly as you say, is in recessionary times, and what that means for the marketing agenda and marketing budgets. That's one area, and of course that ladders up to CEOs and business models and everything else. And also, you talked a little bit about brands for humanity, and I'm curious as to your definition of that, because I think I remember, and it might have been at a master's a few years ago. I think it might have been Dean Aragon, actually, from Shell, who had mentioned brands for humans. And I think in that context, he was talking about there is no B2B and there is no B2C.
Right.
We talk to people. But anyway, let's start with those. And then I'd love to turn to a number of subjects. So let's talk about growth, your growth agenda then,
Yeah.
as marketers face, some uncertain economic waters.
Yeah, let's set the table. The marketing industry has really been turned on its head in the past decade. And when you think about the media transformation that has taken place, it's breathtaking. When you go back to the simple days of print, radio, and television. But through the past decade, growth has been suboptimal. In fact, a point of data that we often quote is that during the 2010 era, from 2010 to 2019, the average rate of growth of a Fortune 500 company was just 3%. Now, that's paltry, and I think it's actually embarrassing for our industry that despite all of this transformation, where we now have the opportunity to get closer to our consumer targets, that all we could muster was an average of 3% of growth. So what does that say about our marketing? And I think part of it is that it's not as efficient and effective as we may think it to be. In fact, the evolution is maybe just the cost of doing business today with respect to our various competitive and consumer audiences. And this is the reason why we needed to evolve well beyond just creativity and brand building. We needed to take an increasing focus in data and data analytics, technology and marketing technology in particular, measurement so that we can make more effective decisions, the quality and effectiveness of our talent to ensure that it is not only diverse, but it is skilled appropriately to be able to handle the complex environment that we have today, and to recognize that, in fact, things such as sustainability and DEIB are just not feel-good kinds of things, but truly are growth engines. And the more that we embrace them, we have demonstrated empirically that they, in fact, can build growth. And if you think about what is unfortunate, that the average tenure of a CMO is what, 40 months or less these days. Part of it is because we're not achieving the growth ambitions of the CEO, the CFO, the shareholders, et cetera. And we have to recognize that to be able to do that, we all have to become better business people, and to recognize where the leakage is within the system, whether it be digital ad fraud or lack of data transparency in helping us to make decisions, et cetera. So there are a lot of impediments that some of it we've created ourselves, and we don't necessarily do the due diligence in how we measure effective marketing and what are those engines for growth that are going to make a difference for our respective companies. That's the reason why we've embraced growth as the common agenda across the industry. Let's face it, whether you're an agency, a marketer, a platform, a broadcaster, a researcher, a supplier, consultant, we're all in it to build our brands and to build our businesses under the auspices of a growth agenda. So it is critically important for us to ensure that we're achieving those milestones, and recognizing that there are many mothers and fathers of growth in the way we market to our consumers and customers.
So now, as the growth agenda continues, maybe it's time to actually turn a little bit to 2023.
Sure.
I know that, nobody has a crystal ball, and it seems that change happens faster and more unexpectedly than it ever has. But let's at least start with what you think the top concerns of marketers are going into 2023.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do wish I had a crystal ball that worked, but the reality is, let me express some of the sentiment that went in to our most recent board of directors meeting, which we held at the Masters of Marketing. And what was uppermost in their mind was the health of the economy as probably the leading environmental area of focus that has caused at least some concern and in some quarters fear. Just as we're kind of finally escaping the wrath of COVID, we've gotten hit upon now economic dislocation that is manifesting itself in the worst inflation in 40 years that, the younger audience has no recollection of whatsoever in terms of how bad that was when we were riddled with stagflation back in the early 1980s of high inflation, high interest rates, and high unemployment. And there is fear and concern that that is going to grip us again next year. Now, I think we're better off than we were then, and I think we're better off than where we were in the 2008-09 deep recession, the Great Recession, or whatever you want to call it. And I think it's because there has been a lot of money pumped into the economy. I think consumers' balance sheets are far healthier than they were in some of the darker days of early years. And we are blessed right now with a relatively low unemployment rate, which is a continuous feeder of income in our consumers' pocketbooks, so to speak. So I think you're starting to see some forecasters back off of their gory forecast of the future. And we may just go back to the slower growth days of the early 2010s, which would be just fine. Thank you very much, because I think it would restore some balance to some of the environmental factors of inflation and interest rates and hopefully get them back. But assuming that we can manage through what is clearly an uncertain economic environment, it says a lot about what do we do with our media investments. And we've been along a proponent of saying, hey, even if growth slows, don't back off of your investments. It has been proven with study after study that by maintaining or increasing your budgets, you will actually do a lot for your businesses and brands. And so that was one of the common messages, at least I stoked in my opening remarks at the Masters, which was we have proven it. We know that healthy brands, in fact, lead to better stock market performance. So don't cut back. Rather, consider ways to either make your media investments more productive or actually increment them. That'll give you probably a competitive advantage into the marketplace. So I do think that one of the concerns for next year that is gathering a lot of attention is the total amount of media investment for next year. Then I think the third kind of major bucket that comes out is what is the right marketing mix and the right media mix? It's kind of been an age-old challenge. It's kind of the reason why the ANA is very heavy into cross-media measurement, because we do believe that the ability to understand how various media and marketing investments connect with each other gives us great opportunity to understand what that marketing mix should be in the future. And there is a wide range of focus on how best to achieve those best mixes to optimize those business results. I think there's a lot more experimentation that's taking place. I think that you're seeing people gravitate to experiential marketing and relationship marketing and content marketing, and areas that kind of fall out of what had been legacy marketing. We're seeing a lot more focus in on streaming services and far more contemporary forms of reaching the consumer. And we're seeing shifts, and rightly so, because there are more efficient ways to be able to do it. And I think that really bodes well for what our industry wants and needs, but really puts pressure on the industry to get better. We have a lot of broken systems, I think, or maybe if they're not broken, they certainly can be improved. And we have to kind of work together as an industry. We have to collaborate more because no one really has all of the answers. But we've proven it time and again that when we work together, we can come up with better answers for the industry. So that may be a plate full of stuff that I just threw at you, but I kind of think that those are the kinds of things that we have going for us, and need to focus in on 23 because of the level of uncertainty that's there. And if there's one thing that I personally don't like, and that is uncertainty, because the boundaries and the borders and the foundations, are wobblier, if that's such a word,
Yeah.
than what we would like it to be.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you said something central to it all, and that was the word investment, because I think that even though we may have been talking about recessionary times in the past, and history never exactly repeats itself, it kind of spirals. It looks a bit like it, but the situations are always different. I think that even talking about marketing or media as an investment is a big change from it being an expense
Sure.
as it might have been in the past. And I in addition to proving all the statistics about advertising in a recession, I think there's just the practicality in a digital world that if you take your foot off the media investment gas, what happens is it becomes a lot harder to build back, if you slow down. I think what's interesting though is maybe another balance that we're seeing, and if you don't mind, I'll bring in a little bit of an internationalist study that
Sure.
we did, and that was asking people about a balance between purpose and profits, and how does that work in uncertain times? The answers that we had were quite interesting, and I'd say complex, in that it's not that people don't understand that purpose done right is important, but they also are practical enough to know that companies require growth and require certain profits to do all the good that they might like to do in the world. So it does take us into uncharted waters, and I'd love to know what you're hearing about issues of purpose now, in the midst of purpose washing, in the midst of worrying about, recessionary times.
Yeah, it's well, first of all, credit to the internationals for one of the famous lines that I just absolutely love, and that is marketing makes a world of difference. I think that was a brilliant positioning, and it is so true. And I think that is one of the most declarative and absolute important statements that we all should live by. And regardless of how you frame it, whether it is purpose or sustainability or DEIB, or just the safety that we need to give to all of our respective consumers that are out there, um, we know that it works. I mean, let's not just be into the do-gooders, feel-gooders kind of thing because it just happens to be hot or hotter today. But it factors into the growth equation so brilliantly. And I think that, even in extraordinarily uncertain times that we're kind of facing now and probably will face in the future, particularly 2023, that purpose, DEIB, sustainability, humanity will actually, I think, grow in terms of importance. Um, because what will happen in economic uncertainty is that there will be higher unemployment. There will be more people with mental health issues. There will be the issues of climate change that will only grow, at least in the short term, as we know that we still haven't done all that we should in order to make our planet safer and achieve all the ambitions that many sustainability protocols are pursuing right now. So I think those areas represent very distinct advantages uh, for everyone, for the industry, and I think for individual brands that are looking to ramp up what their responsibility should be to the consumers and the environment and to, from their standpoint, their shareholders. Um, and it's not just you kind of framed it before about between investment and expenses. It's just not an expense just to kind of look like you're doing something positive. Those are truly investments. And we've demonstrated that particularly for efforts such as See Her, ANA See Her, which is focused in on gender equality, and AIM, which is the Alliance for Inclusive and Multicultural Marketing, um, that in fact, investments in both of those truly do lead to better performance. When you demonstrate that, in fact, you are accurately portraying women and cultures in ads, just that sheer fact alone, that can be measured, whether you're reaching those consumers, can improve performance. So it's not only being a force for good, it is being a force for growth. Um, you talked about purpose and potentially purpose washing. Let's be honest with ourselves. Out of every good thing always happens some not so good things. I mean, when you looked at the advent of digital marketing, well, we had, robust ad fraud, we had, transparency issues, et cetera, et cetera. But is the overall effort worth it? And are there more positives than negatives? Absolutely. So the brands that are somehow that purpose wash, they're not going to win. Essentially, it's going to be, a net loss for them because consumers are going to recognize their inauthenticity, and it'll work against them. But those that truly have that embrace of purpose, where marketing does make a world of difference and where those consumers are comfortable with the directions of the brands and hopefully have an affinity and loyalty to those brands, they're going to be the winners. And again, it's empirically demonstrated. So yes, while purpose washing is an issue, I think we're becoming increasingly sensitive to it, and hopefully those that are in that arena, hopefully they will diminish those bad behaviors. But there's a lot on the plate in being that force for good because it does drive growth.
No, and you mentioned a key word in all of this, and I think it's responsibility. And that wasn't necessarily a word that was the first word associated with marketing in the past. I just have, we could talk all day. I just have a couple of quick questions
Sure.
before we close. Um, you started out by saying that the 20s haven't been that kind to us, or at least the 2020s haven't been that kind to us and so on. Do you think that given these series of constant crises, that the role of marketing has changed?
That's a great question. There's no doubt it has. And I think that, I kind of alluded to a little bit of it before, is that it really does have an increasing focus on humanity. The racial and social strife has encouraged us to become far more inclusive as a society and as an industry. Um, the COVID has basically taught brands that they have to put people first. So I do think that some of the intent that we spoke about earlier has clearly changed things. But I do think that whether it had to do with the not so great early 2020s, um, technology is going to be a constant force for us over the course of time. It's going to play an increasing role. In fact, if you look at the amount of marketing and media investment in quote unquote digital media, I mean, it is 4 times the investment that is currently in television. We call it more linear television, but even some of the CTV stuff. And that transformation is only going to continue because it's effective, cost effective, it's flexible, it gives far greater alternatives. The ability to experiment and be an entrepreneur with technology is just incredible. And so just even the way we market and communicate to each other now, having virtual technology to do just what we're doing right now, and that is having a robust conversation, just gives us so much opportunities at productivity. But we as an industry need to learn that just because we embrace technology doesn't mean it's going to be successful. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity for leakage of those media investments, and I do think that, if we had to have a call to action, I would ask the chief financial officers for a greater degree of due diligence on the effectiveness of marketing and media spend, so to ensure that that the industry comes clean with where that leakage is happening, whether it's fraud or the lack of transparency within the digital media supply chain, or some of the brand safety issues that are in fact taking place, because not all of our marketing investments are necessarily working. And just to state a fact that has come out of various studies, particularly in digital media, we could very easily rationalize less than 30% of digital media investments reach the consumer. That's a big, big change from the old legacy days where it was always a 75-25 split of working to non-working. It's kind of reversed. So we have a lot to learn about the effectiveness of our marketing as we go through that. And technology can be both an asset and a liability in that regard.
Yeah, and it seems to be very true in a digital world. Well, you've always been an advocate of believing that you can't see progress unless you don't start measuring the basics. And I can see that is certainly going to be an increased trend, for the ANA's mission in the coming years. But let me just ask you as a last question, if this is even possible. What one word or phrase do you believe will characterize the coming year for marketers?
Um, it's a great question, and my brain is whirring as you've asked the question. Uh, it may not be the most popular word, but I think that what we need, because of that level of uncertainty, is curated navigation. And what that means is that we're going to all have to place bets. And in a more uncertain world, the ability to place those bets requires an understanding of what your options are, to make intelligent choices, and to curate how best you're going to deploy those choices. It may not always work, but if you kind of step back and be far more choiceful in what you do and how you approach that, the odds of you succeeding, I think, will increase over the course of time. And navigation requires us to be agile, to be flexible, because when something comes our way, we have to perhaps navigate in a slightly different way to be able to deal with unexpected things that may come our way. So while we'd always like to curate it, I think that level of agility as we navigate that uncertainty would be my recommendation for the next year.
Well, even though it may not be a phrase that falls trippingly off the tongue, to quote Shakespeare, I would go on to say that in your curated navigation, I'm sure that the ANA will play a role as a primary compass in all of that to keep the analogy going.
That's what we have to do.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. It's always wonderful to talk to you, and I very much look forward to your next conversation. And I always applaud you for your leadership in working with an industry that is so wide-ranging and so fast-changing. So always a pleasure to talk to you.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for having me. I look forward to our next discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward. Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal